Alright, I'm going to be talking about the Mr. Tompkins reading. So there are two chapters in Mr. Tompkins. The first one is about Mr. Tompkins. He is a banker and he's like enjoying his day off. And during his day off, he decides to attend a lecture at a local university. And this lecture is about Einstein's theories of relativity. So during the lecturer talks about the universal speed limit, which is the speed of light, and how like nothing can go faster than the speed of light. And as an object approaches the speed of light, it becomes contracted in its direction of movement. And during this, Mr. Tompkins falls asleep and ends up dreaming, and in his dream he encounters a cyclist. And as he's observing the cyclist, he sees that the cyclist is flattened in this direction. Moving the cyclist is just flat as he moves past him. Mr. Tompkins is like, oh, this must be the lecture was talking about how as an object moves, it becomes flattened in its direction of movement. But it seems like the universal speed limit here is much lower than the speed of light, which is why you can easily like observe it, even though the cyclist isn't moving that quickly. So Mr. Tompkins decides he's going to kind of like try this himself. So he gets on his own bike and he starts like riding on it, and he notices that he himself is not becoming flattened, and he thinks, but everything else around him is becoming flattened, and realizes, oh, so to myself and my bike, I'm not moving at all. Relative to me, I'm not moving, but everything else relative to me is moving. So to him, everything else is moving, so everything else is becoming flattened. So then he ends up catching up to the biker, and he notices, oh, the biker isn't flattened either, and it's because relative to me, the biker is not moving. We're both moving at the same speed, so relative to each other, we're not moving. So to each other, we're not becoming flattened. Everything else around us is becoming flattened. And after encountering the biker, later on, he goes to a train station, and at the train station, he sees a middle-aged man get off the train, and the middle-aged man is greeted by an old woman. And what's strange is the old woman calls the middle-aged man grandfather. So Mr. Tompkins is confused about this because he's just like, okay. He's like, huh. So he goes up to them and asks, okay, so how can you be this old woman's grandfather when she's clearly much older than you? And the old man says, well, my job travels a lot, and because I travel a lot, to me, as I travel, time is moving much more slowly for me than my relatives in the city. So as I move, so since the train is always moving, for me, time is passing more slowly relative to the city because they're not moving at all. So my granddaughter is just in the city. She's just aging normally, but for me on the train, I'm aging more slowly, which is why I'm younger than her. So Mr. Tompkins is like, okay, I need to sit down for a moment after this, and he goes to a cafe, gets some lunch, and he meets one of the train workers there. Train worker, he asks the train worker, so why is this going on? Why is people on the train seem to age more slowly than the people who are not on the train? And the worker says, well, it's kind of because of me and the other railroad workers, because we control the speed of the train. So as I make the train slow down, people on the train kind of like age more quickly, but then as my coworkers speed the train up, they age more slowly. So Mr. Tompkins is just like, he wakes up after this, and then he goes home, because everyone else lectures over. By the time he wakes up, he goes home. And now the second chapter of the reading, it basically says the background for this. The second chapter reading is the lecture that Mr. Tompkins was listening to, that he fell asleep to. And this lecture basically just talks about the principles of the theory of relativity, where there's three main things. Where if I'm watching an object approach the speed of light, from my perspective, relative to me, that object, first off, is becoming shorter in its direction of movement. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, from my perspective, if there's like a clock in that object, the clock would be running much more slowly than like the clock I have in my hand. So that's the second thing. As an object approaches the speed of light, its time is much more slowly runs much more slowly from an outside observer. And the final principle is, from an outside observer, the mass of the object is becoming much, much larger. So again, if I were watching an object approach the speed of light, from my perspective, the object would be becoming shorter, the clock on the object would be running slower, and if I were to somehow measure its mass, I would notice its mass is much larger. So as an object, so those are just like the three principles that second chapter talks about, and that's kind of like the background of what the first chapter was based off. What Mr. Tompkins' experiences demonstrates those principles of relativity.